Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Today, my name is Walter. I'm a full stack developer at Pivotal Labs, and I've been known to write a mobile app, once in a while here, and I've developed some opinions over time. So today, there will be lots of Walter opinions that you may agree or disagree with, but there will also be lots of code. So I think we can hopefully all agree on that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Um, at the end, I have a link to a GitHub repo to show everything that I'm showing you here. That said, let's jump right in. Um, the dream of the cross-platform app, I think, is alive and well, right? I think of success stories like the JVM, right? Write your app once, run it anywhere. I think you can largely do that today. I also think of the web. Write your app and run it once, and we do this all the time, provided you have the right browser version, and of course, provided you have the right version of the JVM running. Um, but aside from those minor details, I think by and large, it just works. And it's a really nice developer experience today. Um, but I don't think that's necessarily true for mobile apps. I think that over there, maybe that dream is not quite there yet. Everything changes so quickly, and you're beholden to all of these vendors. Platforms come and go. For example, I'd hate to, be a shop that wrote a lot of BlackBerry apps right now because there probably aren't many users around anymore. But if you had asked me that maybe, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, my answer might have been different. Similarly for Windows Mobile, things come and go, and you don't always have a lot of time to invest in writing an app for everything under the sun. So a lot of tooling has sprung up to try to make that cross-platform dream work in the mobile world. And I think in some ways it's made it perhaps a bit worse than otherwise, because now we have so many great choices available that it's almost analysis by paralysis. How can you make the right choice in the platform that you're targeting for your product, as well as how can you make the right choice with tooling? Are you really going to try to pursue that dream of writing the app once and running it everywhere? So I'll get to my opinion here as we move on, but for now, I just want you to keep that in the back of your head. That said, I also want you to keep in the back of your head just how many choices there are available today. Gosh, maybe you work with a lot of C# developers, and you think, gosh, if we could just write our app in C#, we'd save a ton of time and we could deploy it everywhere. In that case, you might lean towards Xamarin. Maybe you work with a lot of people who love JavaScript. They might think, gosh, if I could just write my app in JavaScript, I would save so much time. And you might lean more towards React Native, or maybe a hybrid web app, something that's wrapped in a WebView. I think that there are so many choices that there actually is a cost associated with that. Specifically, the cost of making the wrong choice. I remember back, around 2013, 14 or so, I remember that Xamarin was pretty popular, and I remember that PhoneGap was pretty popular, at least in the circles that I ran around in. And I think that there's actually a possibility that if you had written an app, some kind of wrapped WebView back then, you might have rewritten it by the time today rolls around, because those kinds of apps aren't as popular as they used to be. So I think there's a hidden danger here lurking under all these choices, and we'll evaluate them one by one to figure that out. But let's just keep that in the back of our heads as we move forward. So we have a ton of choices available. Oh my goodness, what do we choose? Well, we might choose to wrap a WebView. This actually used to be a popular thing to do. I don't think it's as popular anymore, but sure, there's still apps that do this. So we could just take a WebView, throw it in some kind of native app shell of some sort, and there we go. Now we're on the App Store. That's so cool. People can download our app, and it's great that we're there, but we might find that our app doesn't perform so well. We might find that scrolling is odd, and there are all sorts of native capabilities we can't really access. We might find that even though we got a speed boost from basically writing a web app, that we sort of lose that speed boost as time goes on, as we have to reach deeper and deeper into that native platform, and that maybe the features aren't really there. So although it's very easy to get started, it's also arguably easy to stall out over time. So I would raise this question: if you're leaning towards wrapping WebView, maybe, could you have just written a web app instead? Yes, you don't get to be on the App Store, but it's essentially what you're doing anyway. You're not really fooling anybody. They'll see as soon as they open up your app and try to scroll, see it acting kind of weird and realizing that you've wrapped a WebView. And they may not care, but eventually you might grow to the point where it actually starts to matter. So there's a trade-off here. So, okay, maybe we're not going to wrap a WebView. Maybe we're going to do something else. I think that what I call the third-party wrappers, I think that this technique is a lot more popular nowadays. Think of something like Flutter or React Native or or Xamarin or any of the tools today that let you write your app in whatever your favorite language is that's not natively running on the platform, like iOS or Android, whatever. Something that might compile down to something natively, but doesn't work out of the box. You're heavily dependent in this world on Facebook or Google or whoever, Microsoft, whoever's tool you're using. You're heavily dependent on them to keep supporting that tool, and more importantly, to keep up with API changes on your target platforms, iOS or Android. I think that this is awfully tempting for a lot of developers and a lot of groups. You can use whatever your favorite language is, and that seems like it might save some time. Furthermore, they offer the stream of really writing an app once and running it anywhere. I do think that that is true to an extent, but I think that there are also edge cases, some of which some shops that have migrated away from this style of app development have been very loud and vocal about. For other people, it works great. I'm not going to knock it completely. It's a tool, right? And sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. But I would raise this question if you're leaning in this direction. Sure, using your favorite language might save you time in the beginning, but arguably, isn't it harder to learn a framework like Cocoa Touch or isn't it harder to learn a framework instead of learning a language? And maybe you're going to spend more time doing this than you would expect, because now you don't just have to learn iOS and Android and maybe the web. Now you also have to learn how to use your tool and hope that the vendor doesn't go under. So eventually you may run up against edge cases. So, which brings us to our third option here, just writing a native app directly. Sure, you can't share any code, but you can use any API that iOS or Android or whatever you're targeting supports. And isn't that a great thing? So I think that sort of independence can be really helpful. You're not beholden to your tooling vendor to release something new. Which is kind of nice. Of course, this comes at the very, very hefty cost of having to write the same app twice or more if a viable third platform comes out. You're gonna have to write it many, many times as this landscape changes over time. So if we look at these approaches to these three approaches to app development, we can see that none of them are perfect, right? They all have some nice benefits and a lot of downsides to all of them. So I would ask, is there a happy medium? Is there a compromise of some sort where we can maybe not write the whole app once and run it anywhere, but what if we could write parts of it and share those? Something more like a library, if you will. And I think that if we're going to go down that road, maybe there's something there. So I'm going to present a strong opinion here, and we're gonna see what it looks like in real code in a minute here. But my strong opinion is that you should consider actually writing that app twice, or at least parts of it twice. Consider staying away from the hybrid mobile app. Consider staying away from the wrapping tools of the world, and just embrace writing a native app. You never really know how the landscape will change in the future in regards to tooling, and I can imagine a scenario where you're a very unlucky developer early on in let's say 10 years ago, you were starting to develop mobile apps and you decided to embrace PhoneGap or some other WebView wrapping tool. You would have embraced PhoneGap, you would have written your app, and a few years later, oh my goodness, React Native is out. Wow, this is great, we have to rewrite our app now. So you rewrite your app to run React Native, and oh my goodness, now Flutter is out, wow, now we have to support Flutter. So maybe you like that better. So you rewrite your app again, and you've spent 10 years now writing everything except native code on the platform that you're targeting. You spend all this time learning these third-party tools, which might have saved you some time, but you've now rewritten your app multiple times. I would argue that over that 10 years, you could have just spent time getting to know iOS and Android, whatever you're targeting, and just learning those APIs directly. Indeed, parts of them change, but a lot of parts don't change that much. Using a button, for example, in iOS, using a UI button is not that different today than it was 5 years ago, or even before that. So I'm going to encourage us to think about rewriting our app for each platform right now, with the caveat that we're going to try to share as much business logic as we reasonably can. Okay, well, how could we do that? My criteria here is that we want to use as little third-party tooling as possible, and whatever we write our business logic in, it needs to run natively on every platform. So this is my criteria. It needs to run out of the box, more or less, without you significantly changing the platform target of your choice. So let's look at the landscape. What do we have available today? It's actually not that much. We don't have a lot of choices. I don't think the cross-platform dream is necessarily over, but we're certainly constrained. The tooling candidates that I've identified are parts of Kotlin multi-platform. There's a caveat there that we'll get into. At least Kotlin will run on Android already, which is great. It could theoretically target iOS, although that was broken for me when I tried it. But it can also be compiled into JavaScript, which we'll see runs in many places. Or there's our old friend C or C++, which has been around for quite some time. So let's maybe jump into this a little more closely. What do we have available? Well, JavaScript will run on iOS. As far as I know, it doesn't run on Android without some third-party library, which may not be a deal breaker, but under these rules, if using as little tooling as possible, that might be a deal breaker for us. And of course, JavaScript is the language of the web these days. It will run, it powers the web, right? So it would run no problem there. So we have 2 out of 3. That's not bad, but I don't want to leave Android behind. Maybe we can find something else that works better in all 3 places, which will lead us to Kotlin multi-platform. Also promising, very promising. Certainly, it'll run on Android out of the box if we're targeting in JVM. I didn't have good experiences getting this to work on iOS, but I think there's a somewhat hacky workaround where we could target JavaScript and output our library to that, load that into iOS. That would work out of the box, right? And of course, if we're targeting JavaScript, we could deploy this on the web. Okay. Well, what about that last option there, C, C++? Strangely enough, it was certainly shocking to me as I delved into it, but yeah, this will actually run everywhere. Which is surprising. Yes, you have to compile it. Yes, you sometimes have to wrap it a bit, but it works surprisingly well. And I say this as a developer who usually doesn't write C or C++. So that said, for me, based on my criteria of using as few third-party dependencies as possible and trying to run something pretty much with as minimal tooling as possible, I think right now this is a pretty decent choice to go after. So that said, I've had a lot of talk. I promised you code. You've seen no code. Maybe we should change that. What does it look like? If I actually jump in and show you what this kind of app would be. So that said, I did indeed write an app. I wrote a library and I wrote a few apps. We're going to take a look at them, and I'm going to show you the level of pain it takes to get your library working in iOS and on Android and on the web. So before we jump in, you should know my app has a purpose. I didn't just write it to say hello world. I'll give you the quick backstory here. I'm from the US. I'm from a state called Texas. And in Texas, we have our own slang. We have our own way of talking. I live in New York now. I'm with a lot of New Yorkers. They don't always understand my slang. I don't always understand their slang. So I thought I'd help them out. I give those New Yorkers a chance by teaching them the joy of Texas slang. So I wrote, you can see this here, let me pull this up. I wrote an app, let me zoom out of the way. I wrote an app called the Texas Jargon Generator. It's a lovely thing. I'm here to teach everybody the joy of Texas slang. And my app uses a shared C++ library to generate my slang and randomly choose a phrase to show people. So there's not much to it. It is an ugly app, but the joy is in the content, not in the styling. So all hat, no cattle. Oof, my goodness, take me back already. I feel like I'm back in Texas already. And as I generate phrases here, meaner than a $2 rattlesnake, classic. As I generate phrases here, you know, my app is calling out to my C++ library. It's randomly pulling out a phrase and displaying it on the screen here. So what's the level of pain involved with getting that to work on iOS? Great question. If I open this up, here we are. Hopefully you can all see my Xcode here. Let's see. Am I still? You can still see my screen, right? Hopefully.
Yeah, we're good, Walter. Keep
Okay,
going, my
cool.
friend.
Cheers. Thanks. So this is what it's like to actually call out to my app. Sorry, my library here. What you're looking at is a somewhat strange language. It's Objective-C++, but it's not as bad as it sounds. This function here came from my C++ library. And this is what the implementation looks like. There's not that much to it. It's pretty simple. But yeah, you basically ask it to generate a phrase. Of the phrases available, it picks one randomly, spits it back out to you. So this is the function that we're calling here. And if we look, this is my library as is. It'll be the exact same library used here in iOS and Android and later on the web. We can see that interacting with it is not actually that painful. Here in Objective-C++, we call out to my function. We take the phrase, convert it into an NS string, spit that out. We expose this to Swift, of course, through this bridging header here, and I can call this directly from Swift. Not bad, right? Random jargon generator, generate a phrase, and we spit that out. Now that we're here in Swift, we can just toss this in any view that we want. Not too bad. The amount of glue code that it takes to make this work is relatively small. This wasn't so bad. Okay, so you might say, well, okay, Walter, that was iOS, but you still have 2 more platforms to support. Surely this is going to get a lot more painful. Well, maybe. Let's see. So I wrote the same app again in Android. And here we are. Let's get a phrase. Let's all embrace Texan slang here. Y'all, another classic, gosh. All hat, no cattle. So I'm using the same library here. And of course, the way that I call out to it is very different, but I am living the dream here of the cross-platform app in that I'm sharing the business logic of my app. And if I look at the pain that it took to do that, it wasn't that bad either here. Of course, here being in the JVM, we have to deal with JNI, which isn't always the most pleasant thing, but it wasn't too bad. Here's the wrapper that I used to call out to my library. Here's our friend generate phrase. This is the exact same function that you saw here in Xcode, generate phrase. Of course, I take my phrase and I convert that into something that the JVM will understand, a string that will run over there. And that's it. I call out to this, you know, whenever I click a button here, and my app just works. So not too bad. Of course, I realize this is a small app and it could get more painful as it gets bigger, but but it does work. So I promised you the web. I certainly will deliver on the web. So what we're looking at here is my web app. It's very small. I'll go ahead and run it first and show you what that looks like. I've already built it, so we don't need to worry about that. I'll just start a quick web server, and we can embrace the joys of Texas slang here on the web. We'll just go to localhost 8080, and my goodness, might could, another classic. And as I refresh this, I'll get another random phrase every time. And when I look at what that took, it won't be too bad. This is it. It's a web app with truly minimal dependencies here. Just a lot of vanilla JavaScript. My build artifact from compiling my C++ library with Inscriptum here. And yeah, accessing this from JavaScript is really not that bad. Compiling it was a little bit of a pain, but once it's compiled, it's not too bad. I can call out to my library and generate phrase. That's the exact same function that we saw, back over here, the exact same one that we saw back over here in iOS. So I can call out to that. I get a phrase out of that, and I can render it here, just as I did anywhere else. I will say, of all the three, this was the most painful to compile. This is what my build script looked like, and I think the reason it was painful is I had to actually select the function I wanted to export. I think there are ways to make this a bit easier, but as somebody new to Inscriptum jumping in, I was able to get this up and running with relatively low effort. I think that if I had to do it again, it would be a bit simpler. So that brings us back to where we were. Let's jump back in. So I think in the end, we've seen that yes, it is possible to use the whatever capabilities come with your target platform, and to build something, a library, just with good design that runs on all three, at least the three that I was targeting: iOS, Android, and the web. And that I really didn't need. I didn't need to abstract away those platform differences. Instead, I embraced them. And you know, my C++ code, it will hopefully be supported on future platforms as well. It's been around for decades. Unlike the tool du jour of the week, this actually worked quite well for me here. And it won't work well all the time, but I think it's an option that more teams should consider. So with that, I'd love to hear if you have any questions. And yeah, if you are interested in learning some Texas jargon yourself, I encourage you to check out the repo. And you know, you might find that your life is better with phrases like "all hat, no cattle." So cheers. Any questions?
Fabulous. Thank you, Walter. Yes, who doesn't need more Texas sayings in their lives? I was recently very fortunate enough to have traveled to Texas and went to a karaoke session there, which included the hit song "All My Exes Live in Texas."
Oh,
I told my 7-year-old, and now he thinks that's hilarious.
it's a
Obviously,
classic.
yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. So, so thank you so much for that great presentation there. So you think C++ is the thing, the one ring to rule them all?
Well, it might be C if you hate C++. You know, I don't want to pick a side, but I think that it's discounted perhaps more than it should be. It does work, and it can get hairy, but I don't think the learning curve is quite too bad. Yeah, I think it's an option that we should consider, certainly.
And we do have a question that's come in through the QA. Is it okay for you to spend a moment?
Sure. Yep.
So, so this particular person is asking, why is this approach better than Flutter for developing business or productivity apps? And as a follow-on question, how do you see Java FX with regards to this approach? So it
Sure.
seems like a pretty broad question, but yes, I've heard of Flutter myself. Yeah, what do you think?
Gosh, So I'll say the disclaimer now. I've never written a Flutter app. I've read about it. I've seen sample code, but I haven't gone through the journey. Um, I think it's a different approach than Flutter. I can't say that it's always going to be better. It's a trade-off. By using a tool like Flutter, you are you're accepting the trade-off that the vendor might stop supporting it someday in exchange for what is hopefully an easier an easier experience writing a cross-platform app. If you trust your vendor to keep supporting your tool, then by all means, go for it. On the other hand, if a new platform were to come out tomorrow, could you deploy your app to it if you have written the whole thing using Flutter? If BlackBerry comes back from the dead, is your Flutter app going to compile and run on it? I'd ask that. I think that's part of the trade-off. As for JavaFX, I really don't know enough about it to say. I'd love to hear more about it.
And are you excited about Fuchsia and about what that might mean?
I am excited about Fuchsia, yeah. I've
It,
read articles about it. It'd be cool.
yeah, I see. I know that there's, huge behemoths in that space of Android and iOS, and
Mm,
yeah, that's great. But they've been around for quite a long time now, sort of 10 years or
they
so. So
have, they have.
everyone's wondering, will something happen? Maybe Fuchsia is worth keeping an eye on. I also noticed there's a couple of Linux phones heading
There
onto
are.
with what GNOME UIs maybe.
There was, I know Ubuntu had something they were working on. There was a Firefox operating system for phones. I know they're out there.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's right. WebOS still around on LG TVs and all sorts of other stuff. I could
still
talk about
kicking.
this stuff for hours. I probably shouldn't. So if anyone else has any QAs, they can try and get those in. Will you stick around for a little while, Walter, and
Sure,
maybe answer some QA questions offline? Would that be good?
absolutely.
Um,
Thank you so much for your time, everybody. Appreciate it.